this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
I call Dr David Clark.
Mr Speaker, I rise on behalf of the Labour Party to oppose this bill. I do so with some regret. It is the Labour Party's firm conviction that those who borrow money from the taxpayer for the purposes of bettering themselves and their families and their communities ought to repay those loans, and that is something that we have supported, and we certainly have supported bills in this House that are designed to achieve that end. However, this particular bill introduces some particularly punitive measures, and we see that it is likely to cause some very unfortunate outcomes. The police have given clear indication that they don't have the resources necessary to implement it. It is a populist gimmick, this arrest at the border provision, which sits at the heart of the bill, and the National Party know that. This is posturing. This is election year posturing in its authoritarian form, and as Labour Party members, we're unable to support it. It stands in stark contrast to the relaxed position taken opposite in response to multinational tax avoidance. We know very well that the likes of Facebook and Google are paying minimal tax in New Zealand. They are paying, in many cases, less tax than individual members in this House. And yet the government has no problem with that. It's not going after them. Instead, it is sitting on its hands and chasing young students who don't actually have, in many cases, the resource to fight back. This is a government that's obsessed with chasing the little guy. This is a government that is obsessed with beating up small business, with tilting the playing field so that big business, who doesn't pay tax, can get ahead, and destroying small business. Destroying small business. I don't know why the National Party hates small business so much. Maybe they have lost touch with their roots. Maybe they have lost touch with the fact that small business makes up the bulk of businesses in this country that contribute to our GDP, to the growth in our economy, to the provision of jobs. Maybe they are so out of touch and arrogant that they don't think that they need the votes of ordinary small business folk. They are now so much in the pocket of big business that they are only running their lines. They are only interested in protecting the interests of big business. And actually, I am keen to communicate to those members opposite that even the big business folk that I've heard from don't like it. They want others to have the opportunity they've had to grow in New Zealand, to export their products. They don't want a country where there are fewer and fewer and fewer successful businesses, and that is the environment that this government is creating. And here we have another example. But I want to take a moment to pause and think about the interest-free student loan scheme that we are discussing here amendments to. This is a scheme that was one of the great achievements of the Clark Labor government. Removing punitive and unsustainable interest charges from student loans defanged what had become an increasingly impractical and generationally unfair system for funding tertiary students. This was one of the great achievements of the Labor Clark government, and I'm very proud to represent an electorate that has more students than any other in New Zealand. I'm proud to represent Dunedin North, where students benefit from this interest-free student loan scheme that makes possible learning that otherwise would not be possible for many of those students. It's a great scheme, and I do have to note for the record how much National opposed it. They were not happy with the interest-free student loan scheme. They did not want it introduced, but now they're forced through their, I don't know, maybe the change of principle that sat alongside decisions never to go with New Zealand First, that now means that circumstances have changed. Those kind of flexible principles that John Key espouses. The member there is making clear that she has a view on these things, but it's very clear that the government opposite are very flexible in terms of the statements they make. They'll say one thing stridently and changed their position on it, and the student loan bill is no different. They were howling at the moon when the scheme was introduced, and now National supports the student loan scheme, albeit through gritted teeth. They consistently look for ways to get around that ruling, and we've seen the $40 charge they've introduced to all borrowers to make sure that there are administration costs covered. They don't like interest-free loans, they hate them. And I hear the member Mike Sabin opposite yelling out, he hates student loans, he hates interest-free student loans, as much as the rest of them. Oh, they hate students, I'm hearing. They hate students. Well, perhaps that's true. Certainly those who would be at university with the student loan scheme.
Point of order. Point of order. Mike Sabin.
The member just made an allegation that I said that I hated student loans. It's quite an I didn't say anything of the sort.
The member was said. That's not a point of order. Dr. David Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They are upset at having that pointed out, the fact that they objected to student loans when they were introduced. They didn't like interest-free student loans. They still don't like them, and they certainly don't like it having it pointed out. And I hope that students at home watching this exchange in Parliament remember that. Remember how much they don't like the student loan interest-free provision, how much the National Government would dearly like to reintroduce more charges on student loans, including the charges they've already introduced, the $40 annual charge that was introduced by the National Party. Now, we know that this is one of the best schemes around. We know that it supports the people, the young people in my electorate, and it makes more accessible tertiary education. And we also know that access to allowances has been cut by this government. They have been responsible for, that's right, Mr. Little, they have been responsible for restricting access to student allowances. They are constantly against the wider population getting educated. They think that only those who have deep, deep pockets should access education. And we on this side of the House don't think that's fair. We think everybody should have the opportunity to get ahead. We think that we really need this interest-free student loan scheme to continue, but we also think that it needs to be fair. We think that it needs to be well supported by government, but fair. Those who owe the debt ought to pay it back, but it should not be ridiculed by having punitive measures like this government is introducing in the legislation that are likely to see a few unfortunate students arrested at the border, probably who can't meet their obligations currently, but who have come home, perhaps say for a family funeral, and find themselves arrested at the border because they can't meet their commitments. And we've certainly had indication from the department that it won't be able to pursue all of the people who might fall into this category. It's likely to try and make an example out of a few. It won't generate money. We've asked for figures. They don't know how much money this policy might generate. It really is posturing. It's a distasteful gimmick. And it is this National Government doing some dog whistle politics because they can't get rid of the interest-free student loan. It's too popular. It is too good a policy. It allows too many people access to education, and people would notice. So this arrogant, out-of-touch National Government is looking at all the petty changes it can make to try and send that dog whistle to its core vote. Well, the times they are a-changing. The times they are a-changing, and we certainly heard plenty of submissions in that select committee, which I will concede was well chaired by Mr Goldsmith, whom I have always supported for the FEC chair role. And I'm looking forward to his contribution in due course, though he does sometimes adopt some kind of punitive attitudes himself in terms of these pieces of legislation, and will, I'm sure, talk about the privilege it is to access these things and make very clear that the support for the student loan scheme has many conditions attached and is begrudgingly given. But we'll look forward to hearing what he has to say from his own mouth when he has the opportunity. What I want to say, Mr Speaker, is that Labor supports practical, real solutions to improve the collection of student loans, not focus group gimmick-based policies that do not address the real issue.
I call Paul Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My pleasure to speak on this bill.